Arizona Territory. March 1879. The desert wind blew hot and mean through the mining town of Dry Creek, whistling between the crooked buildings like it had a grudge. Elias Merritt rode in just after sundown, dust caked in the seams of his coat, the sun bleeding red behind him. He was not looking for trouble, had not been in a long while, but trouble had a way of finding men like him. The kind who had seen war, who had ridden with rangers and buried more friends than he cared to count. He stopped his horse outside the sheriff's office, eyeing the rust-specked bars on the side window. Something about the building felt off. It was too quiet, too still for a town that size. The lamplight inside flickered like it was trying to say something. Elias dismounted, tying his reins loose. He pushed open the door. Sheriff Dobbins sat slouched at the desk, whiskey bottle half empty beside him, boots up, eyes bloodshot. He barely looked up. "What do you want?" he asked. Elias looked around. There was something behind the back door. A faint sound. A voice? Passing through. "Looking for a place to water my horse," Elias said, then nodded toward the jail cells. "You got someone locked up back there?" Dobbins snorted. "None of your business." But Elias moved past him anyway, boots heavy on the wood floor. He opened the door and stepped into the holding room. The girl was sitting on the dirt floor behind iron bars, her white dress torn at the hem, dried blood on one sleeve. Her hair was a mess of dark curls, her lips cracked from thirst. But her eyes were wild and sharp and alive. She stood when she saw him. "You're not one of them." Elias stepped closer. "Who are you?" "Cora Bennett," she said, voice steady despite everything. "I was supposed to be married today. They took me from the church." Elias stared, anger rising in his chest. "Who?" "The sheriff and his brother. They killed my father. Shot him right in front of me. Said I belong to them now." Elias turned back into the main office. "You took her." His voice was cold. Dobbins stood, swaying slightly. "She was promised to my brother. Her old man owed us money. She's not yours to keep." Dobbins reached for his gun, but Elias was faster. One shot, straight through the shoulder, sent the man crumpling to the floor with a scream. Elias stepped over him, grabbed the keys from the desk, and unlocked the cell. Cora stumbled as she stepped out. Elias caught her by the arm, steadying her. "Come on," he said. "We leave at dawn." They spent the night in the livery, hidden behind hay bales. Elias gave her his coat and his canteen. She drank slow, careful, like she had learned not to trust anything too fast. "You do not have to stay," she whispered in the dark. "I know," he said. "But I will." She looked at him, eyes soft in the lamplight. "Why?" He shrugged, then glanced at her again. "Because no one should be locked up like that. And because you did not break." She looked down at her hands. "Not yet." Dawn came gold and quiet. Elias saddled his horse, then helped her up behind him. She clung to him, not out of fear, but with a kind of calm resolve, like she had made up her mind. They rode out of Dry Creek just as the sun cleared the hills. Cora leaned her cheek into Elias's back, her arms wrapped around him. "I trust you," she said. Those 3 words hit deeper than he expected. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. They rode for hours, crossing dry washes and scrub-covered hills, until they came to a river bend where cottonwoods grew thick. Elias had a cabin there, left to him by a friend who had not made it home from the war. He helped her down, watched her look around, breathing in the air like it was the first clean thing she had tasted in days. "This is yours?" she asked. "It is ours now," he said quietly. Cora looked at him, and something shifted in her eyes. Not fear, not hesitation, just quiet understanding. "I never had a choice before," she said. "They told me who to marry, where to live, what to wear, that I should smile when I was scared." Elias stepped closer. "You have one now." She nodded, eyes shining. "Then I choose this." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She did not flinch. She stepped into his arms, slow and sure, and he held her like something precious. Not because she was fragile, but because she had survived. They stayed there for days, letting the world fall away. Elias repaired the roof, cooked what he could catch, and Cora mended clothes, tended the place like it had always been hers. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in blood and gold, Cora stood on the porch, her hand resting on Elias's chest. "I do not know what love is supposed to look like," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Elias took her hand, pressing it to his heart. "Maybe it looks like this." She smiled, small but true. "Then I think I am already in it." The first rain came 6 days after they reached the riverbend. It fell soft and steady, pattering over the roof and turning the dust to clay. The air held the clean scent of wet mesquite and distant thunder. Cora stood barefoot beneath the awning, one hand resting on the post, her hair damp at the ends. She watched the drops beat along the eaves as if waiting for something. Elias was inside, fitting a new hinge onto the doorframe. When the wind shifted and brought the smell of the rain in, he paused and looked toward her. "You ever seen a spring coming this far south?" he asked. "I was born near Flagstaff," she said without turning. "Up there, the snow stays long enough to forget what green looks like. Down here, the year changes in hours." He set the hammer down and stepped to the doorway. "You miss it." "I miss what it used to be," she answered. "Not what it turned into." He didn't ask what that meant. He didn't have to. Some things didn't need naming, they just hung between people like the damp in the air. That night, they ate roasted quail and beans by lantern light. The fire cracked low in the hearth, and the silence between them was easy. Cora sat on the floor beside the hearthstone, legs tucked beneath her, sewing a rent in her sleeve with a needle Elias had found in a rusted tin. "Did you ever marry?" she asked, eyes still on the thread. "No," he said. "Why not?" He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. "I did things during the war. Some of it I regret. Some of it I carry quiet. I thought I'd best stay alone. Keep the weight where it belonged." She tied off the stitch and looked up. "And now?" He met her gaze, steady and without flinch. "Now I think maybe you're the first person I've met who doesn't make me want to run from myself." Cora didn't speak for a long while. Then she set the shirt aside and stood. "Come with me," she said. Outside, the moon was full and pale over the trees. The river moved slow and high from the rain, its surface silvered under the sky. She led him to the edge of it, where smooth stones jutted up from the mud. "I used to come to the river as a girl," she said. "I'd sit with my feet in the water and make up stories about the people who'd passed through here before me. Apache, mule trains, drifters. I'd imagine they left parts of themselves behind, songs, names, pieces of cloth caught in branches." Elias crouched beside her, brushing a thumb over the edge of a flat stone. "You still do that?" "I stopped when my mother died," she said. After that, it felt foolish. He didn't try to offer comfort. Instead, he picked up a stone and tossed it into the current. "Seems to me stories are the only thing that stay behind." She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. Then she reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "I don't want to keep running," she said. "Or hiding. I want a real life. One that belongs to me." "You have it," he said quietly. "Right here, if you'll take it." "I already did. The moment you opened that cell." A coyote called in the distance, high and lonely. Elias drew her closer, his arms settling around her waist like it had always belonged there. "You think the sheriff'll come looking?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not with a wound like that. And even if he does, he won't find us. Not here." She nodded, her head resting against his collarbone. "You were a stranger when I saw you, but I didn't feel afraid. I don't know why. I just knew. You saw something in me I didn't think was left," he said. "That's not nothing." The wind shifted again, bringing the scent of sage and wet stone. Cora tilted her face to the sky. "Will you stay when the season turns?" she asked. He looked at her, his voice low. "I'm not going anywhere." She kissed him, then slow, without urgency. Not as a question, but an answer. The kind that settled deep and quiet, like water sinking into dry earth. When they walked back to the cabin, the lantern still glowed through the window, casting soft gold across the floorboards. She stepped inside first, and he followed, closing the door behind them. The wind outside moved on without them, and the night held steady. By early April, the land had dried to hardpack again, and the cottonwoods wore their first pale leaves. Elias had started building a smokehouse behind the cabin, using cured pine from a deadfall 2 ridges east. He worked in silence, sleeves rolled and hands steady, while Cora dug a bed for onions beside the porch, her skirt tied up above her ankles to keep the hem clean. Midday brought heat and stillness. Not even the flies moved. Cora wiped her brow with the back of her wrist and glanced toward the ridge. "Saw something moving up there this morning," she said. "Could have been a deer. Could have been a man." Elias straightened from the half-finished wall, hammer hanging loose in his grip. "How far?" "Far enough I couldn't make out the shape," she said. But it paused. Watched a while. He studied her face, then set the hammer down. "You trust your eyes?" "I do." He nodded once. "We'll finish the smokehouse by tomorrow. After that I'll set traps along the ridge. If someone's circling, I want to know what they're after." "I doubt it's quail," she said. They didn't speak of it again that day, but after dark, Elias kept the rifle close while Cora banked the fire low. She didn't ask if he was afraid. She already knew the answer. Men like Elias didn't fear for themselves, not anymore. But they feared for what they loved. In the quiet that followed, she sat by the window, mending a thin tear in the quilt they shared. "You ever wish you'd stayed east?" she asked without turning. "No," he said. "There's nothing left for me past the Mississippi." "What about family?" "Had a brother. He died at Antietam." She looked over then. "You never said." "I don't say most things," he replied. "But you let me stay." "I didn't let you," he said gently. "You chose to." She let that settle between them. Then, with a breath, she said, "My mother was Mexican, from Sonora. She married my father against her family's will and never went back." Elias watched her carefully. "You don't look like you come from 2 places." "I don't?" she asked, almost smiling. "No. You look like you belong exactly where you are." Her expression changed, softened in a way that had nothing to do with words. She set the quilt aside and crossed to him, resting her hand on his arm. "I don't know how to live in half measures anymore," she said. "You won't have to." Outside, the coyotes kept their distance, and the ridge held its silence. By the week's end, the smokehouse stood solid, roof pitched to shed the rare rains. Elias had begun curing strips of venison, and Cora collected wild greens along the river to cook with beans. They ate with full mouths and easy hands, and the rhythm of days began to shape itself around them. One morning, while Elias was sharpening the drawknife by the creek, Cora came to him with 2 pigeons dangling from a line tied at her belt. "Found them in the hollow tree near the old fence," she said. "Nest full of feathers. Thought we'd try pigeon stew tonight." He looked up from the blade. "You're getting good at this." "I'm getting good at surviving," she said simply. "Same thing sometimes." She crouched beside him, the hem of her dress brushing the grass. "When I was a girl, I thought I'd marry a man who could read Latin, who'd take me to New Mexico and teach me about stars. Still want that." "No," she said. "I want someone who builds walls straight and keeps his promises. I want a place that doesn't disappear when I close my eyes." He said nothing, but the drawknife stilled in his hand. That night, after the stew, she leaned her head against his shoulder while they watched the fire burn down. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "I don't know how to be anyone's wife. Not the way folks expect." "I don't want what folks expect," he said. She turned her face toward him. "I know. That's why I'm not scared." He kissed her with the care of a man who understood damage and how long it took to earn trust. She kissed him back with the steadiness of someone who'd decided not to look behind her anymore. Later, as they lay beneath the quilt she'd mended, the wind moved through the trees like water, and somewhere beyond the ridge an owl called once, then fell quiet. Elias brushed her hair back from her temple. You still think someone's out there watching? She nodded against his chest. But I'm not worried. Not anymore. Why? Because I'm not alone, she said. He wrapped his arm around her, held her close. The fire cracked once, then settled. Neither of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. The sun rose behind thin clouds, casting pale light across the cabin and softening the sharp lines of the desert hills beyond. Cora stood at the edge of the garden, a basket on her hip, eyes scanning the soil for signs of sprout. She crouched to brush her fingers over a tender shoot, barely visible, green against the brown. Elias came up behind her, quiet in his steps. Something coming up? Mustard greens, she said without looking up. Took root quicker than I thought they would. You always know what'll grow. I listen, she said. Soil tells you if it'll hold something or let it die. He nodded, squinting toward the horizon. That ridge still holding quiet. For now. They walked back together, the silence between them filled with the sound of their boots scuffing dust and the call of a raven overhead. At the porch, Cora paused and turned to him. You ever think about going further west? She asked. I've thought about Montana, he said. Big country, cold water, empty enough to breathe different. You don't miss towns? He shook his head. I've seen what towns do to people. Too much noise. Too many men trying to carry their worth in their fists. She set the basket down and leaned against the railing. My mother used to say a woman should have two things of her own land and her voice. You've got both now, he said. Feels strange to carry them, she said. Like I borrowed them from someone braver. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. You didn't borrow anything. You took back what was yours. She tilted her head, studying him. What did you lose that you never said out loud? He looked past her, out to where the cottonwoods shifted in the breeze. My sense of what a man's supposed to be. The war took that. Left me with pieces I didn't know how to fit. And now I'm learning a man can be steady without being loud. Useful without needing to prove it. Cora reached for his hand, her fingers threading through his. Then I think we match. That afternoon, while Elias dug post holes for a fence to keep out coyotes, Cora rode the mule along the western edge of the property, checking for the trail she'd spotted days before. She found it faint, but real, a narrow depression in the grass, curved like a boot had pressed into it more than once. When she returned, she dismounted and waited until Elias finished tamping the earth around a post. Someone's been circling wider than we thought, she said. Looks like two sets of tracks. Not fresh, but not yet washed out. He wiped his brow and set the shovel aside. Could be cowhands cutting through. She shook her head. Too deliberate. They weren't passing by. They were watching. He didn't speak right away. Then, we'll head to the trading post tomorrow. Get more shot and some oil for the lantern. Will that be enough? It's a start. That evening, they sat outside with coffee warm in their hands and stars beginning to show in the gaps between clouds. Cora pulled her shawl tighter and nodded toward the smokehouse. You ever think about selling meat to the post? Could, he said. Make use of what we've got. Keep us stocked through summer. I could sew too, she said. Cloth's hard to come by out here. I've still got my mother's thimble. He looked at her, the firelight catching along his jaw. You want to trade, we'll trade. You want to stay quiet and let the garden grow, we'll do that instead. I want to build something that stays, she said. Not just survive from one day to the next. He reached over and rested his hand on her knee. Then we'll build it, nail by nail. A hush settled over them, not heavy but rooted. The kind that came when two people had said just enough and meant every word. Later, when they lay together, the lantern low, Cora brushed her fingers along the inside of Elias's wrist. I listen to you breathe at night, she said. It tells me you're not carrying the same weight you used to. He brought her hand to his chest. You gave me something to carry instead. She pressed her forehead to his. Don't let it go. I won't, he said. And with that, she closed her eyes, her body against his, steady and sure as the heartbeat beneath her palm. They left before first light, riding side by side along the dry wash that curled westward toward the trading post. Cora wore a scarf tied at her neck against the grit, and Elias carried the rifle laid across his lap, his eyes sweeping the open land as the sunrise climbed slow behind them. Neither of them spoke much. The air was too still, the kind of still that made a person listen deeper. By mid-morning, they reached the low ridge that marked the edge of familiar ground. The trading post sat another hour beyond, tucked in the basin near a bend in the river. Elias slowed his horse and pointed at a set of faint depressions in the earth just off the trail. Those weren't here last week. Cora leaned down, studying the shape. One rider, maybe two. Moving slow. He nodded once. Could be the same men you saw circling? They pressed on, not hurrying but watching. By the time the post came into view, its flat roof and weathered siding crouched low against the hills the wind had picked up, and the scent of dry sage was thick in the air. Inside, the clerk, a quiet man with a limp and a faded serape over his shoulder, nodded at them but didn't ask questions. Elias bought gun oil, a sack of flour, and a tin of coffee. Cora traded a pair of hand-stitched gloves for a bundle of wool thread and 2 candles. As they turned to leave, a voice behind them stopped them cold. "Thought you were dead, Merritt." Elias turned, slow and measured. A tall man leaned against the doorframe, his hat pulled low. His coat was travel-worn, dust caked along the hem. A scar split the skin just above his jaw. Cora stepped closer to Elias without speaking. "Jude," Elias said. "Didn't expect to see you this far south." The man shrugged. "Didn't expect to see you with company." "She's with me," Elias said. Jude's eyes flicked toward Cora, then back. "Word is there's a price on that sheriff's head. And anyone who helped put him down." Elias didn't blink. That man broke every law beneath the sun. "There's no bounty." "Not official," Jude replied. "But his brother's been asking questions." "Rode through 2 days ago." Cora stepped forward. "What does he want?" "Claims she belongs to him. Says he's owed something." Elias's jaw tensed. That man's not setting foot near her. Jude studied them both. "I'm not here to start anything. But I figured you should know what's coming." Elias gave a curt nod. "You told us. Now let it be." They rode hard on the way back, dust rising behind them like smoke. By the time the cabin came into view, the sun was angled low and the wind had picked up again, tugging at the corners of the roof. Elias checked the traps he'd set along the ridge. One had been sprung but left empty. He reset it in silence, then climbed the slope to scan the horizon. Nothing moved. Back at the cabin, Cora stood by the small table, running her hand along the grain of the wood. "If he comes, I won't hide," she said. "You won't need to," Elias answered. They didn't sleep easy that night. The wind scraped the windows and the fire burned low. But neither of them said what they were both thinking, not until morning, when the sound of hooves broke the quiet. Elias stepped outside, rifle in hand. Cora stood just behind him, calm and unflinching. 2 riders approached. One of them bore the same look Dobbins had worn, entitled and mean. The other hung back, eyes watchful. "You've got something that belongs to me," the first man called. Elias didn't lower the rifle. "She doesn't belong to anyone. I'm her husband by promise," the man spat. "There's no promise that holds after murder." The man's hand drifted toward his holster, but he never got the chance to draw. A sharp report split the air, and Elias's bullet hit the ground inches from the horse's hooves. "I won't warn you again," Elias said. The second rider turned his mount without a word. The first hesitated, eyes flicking toward Cora, then back to Elias. Whatever he saw there made him think twice. He wheeled his horse and followed the other man without a word. When the dust had settled, Elias turned to Cora. She didn't look shaken, just steady, like stone warmed by sun. "They won't come back," he said. "They'd be fools if they did." He stepped close, his hand brushing hers. "You still want to stay here?" "With you?" she asked. He nodded. "I'd stay through 100 more of them if it meant this," she said. Elias touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I never thought I'd have something like this. Not after everything." "You do now," she whispered. He kissed her then, long and deep and quiet. There was no rush in it, no need to prove anything. Only the surety of two people who had bled and survived and chosen one another freely. That evening, she lit one of the new candles, and they cooked together, shoulder to shoulder. He handed her the flour sack, and she dusted the board. The dough came together beneath her hands, and he watched her like he might never get tired of it. After supper, he brought out a small cedar box he'd carved in the evenings over the past week. Inside was a ring, simple silver, shaped smooth, fitted to her finger. "I can't offer church bells or a preacher," he said, "but I can promise you my name, my land, my life." She looked down at the ring, then up at him. "That's more than anyone's ever given me." "Then take it," he said, "and stay." "I already have," she said. They married themselves beneath the cottonwoods the next morning, just the two of them and the wind. She wore her mother's thimble on a ribbon around her neck, and he held her hands like they were the only compass he'd ever needed. Years passed quiet and full. The garden thrived, and the smokehouse stayed stocked through each winter. Cora's stitches became known across the basin, strong, clean, and always on time. Elias traded meat and fence work for seed and salt, and when neighbors came needing help, he never turned them away. They built a second room onto the cabin the year the rains came early, and in that room, their daughter was born with her mother's eyes and her father's silence. At night, when the fire burned low and the sky stretched wide above them, Elias would sit with Cora on the porch, her head on his shoulder, their child asleep just beyond the door. "You ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't stopped at that jail?" he asked once. "No," she said, "because you did, and everything after that is ours." And it was, always would be.